we owe it to ourselves to be the best we can be and to teach what we know and to live within a principled life frame. And that's what really made America great at one time, that we were really pretty much all on the same page. Of course, there's always corruption and there's cheating and all that.
Morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to another episode of the Black Swan Capitalist YouTube channel. Today, we're speaking with David Morgan from the Morgan Report, an exclusive publication providing in-depth analysis on the global economy. David, welcome back, and thank you for joining us again.
Well, thanks for having me. I like that short, sweet introduction, and that's probably a good way to do it because, to go on that topic, but, a lot of people have the associate with silver, as they should, but think that's like the box I'm in, and I'm in a much, there is no box for me. I'm unbounded, I'm open to all possibilities. So, you don't want to categorize anyone. Point being is that you can't really get a good analysis on honest money, the precious metals, the resource sector, currency supply, and all that, unless you have a really big global view. You take it from that big perspective and narrow it on down to XYZ mining, if that's a good investment or not. So thank you for the introduction.
I could have made it so much longer. It just, we got to keep it short and sweet. So there's a lot to discuss, obviously. To start, I would like to get your take and your thoughts on the recent assassination attempt on President Trump's life. It almost appears that the Secret Service allowed the shooter to have an opportunity to take a shot at Trump. So just what are your thoughts on this, and what does this mean for the election?
Well, I agree. There's a lot of things that don't add up, that are just really common sense. And if you are involved with, let's say, that, if you're close to the Secret Service or had a job that was associated with that or whatever, you'd have even more details than I have. I'm going to digress for just a minute. I'm going to go back to 9/11, and I'm going to do this to make the point. My background, as many people know and many don't know, was contractor side of the Air Force. So I wasn't in the Air Force. I was a contractor to the Air Force. Worked on some high-level projects, one being in the white program, the B-1 bomber, and another on the black side. The only one we can talk about is the F-117. But what I know is a lot about, I started flying when I was 16. So I know a lot about how the FAA works and what the protocols are in the military. And so when the first plane went into the first building, there's what's called the ADIZ, the Air Defense Identification Zone. And if you penetrate that ADIZ, basically you are shot down. No questions asked. No, what are you doing here? No turning around. I mean, they might try to make comms with it and, talk them down, but basically you get there because you're talking before they get there. So that first airplane hits. So I just come in from my office in the other room and saw the TV and saw it. It didn't, my mind was rattling, what's going on? And then it settled down and got the idea of what had happened. And then I saw the other second one coming in. And at that point, I knew with an absolute that something was drastically wrong and someone, somewhere, somehow let them in. And that's because of my background. Now, I'm not saying I have that kind of a background with the Secret Service, but applying that same logic, it's basically self-evident that there's something drastically wrong with the building, those rooftops, and being able to have access without the Secret Service having someone stationed there, or at least looking around there and verifying before anyone took the platform that it was clear. So something was wrong, and we've got someone to blame. And now it's who is it, and how did it happen, and why did it happen?
Yeah, great explanation. You made a very good point about the security protocols once you pass certain boundaries. And that's pretty much standard procedure in all nations.
Yes.
Especially as you enter more towards the city.
Right.
Yeah, incredible. And that's just more confirmation because of your background, applying that same logic.
Yeah, I have a lot more to say. I'll give it back to you. I mean, it's upsetting. I'll add on to that. I mean, the second half of the question was, what does it mean for the election? I don't know. It's so sad to me that we cannot rally around the principles, truth, justice, and freedom for all. The ideals that no longer are really there. We can hold them as ideals, certainly. And the patriots, or whoever call themselves patriots, can hold themselves to further those ideals. But we're locked in the quicksand. Everyone's pointing fingers at the other party. And they're not rising above it. The consciousness has to rise. We can't solve these problems of infighting with the same level of thinking that we're doing now, it's just going to make the divide even bigger, in my opinion. So, I know Trump, I know Biden, I don't know them personally. What I know is that the rhetoric will be there. We got to come together. We got to, unite. We got to build as one and all these wonderful words, but they're just words. And we need the action. And the action really comes from the people as well. But when the federal government is responsible for, let's say, the military, especially the veterans, and they're not doing as much as I think they can with the amount of money that's been appropriated to foreign countries. We've got to all scratch our heads, regardless of our political stripes, and ask the question, what the heck are we doing here? Don't we, the old expression, God helps those who help themselves. I mean, charity begins at home, and we are just not doing that anymore. And this is really, really sad. I mean, the homeless problem in the United States is bigger than I've ever seen it. The military veterans are not taken care of it. And I'm not a socialist at all, you know that. But there's a point where, there are needs, and those needs need to be met. And I'm a huge believer in a hand up, but not a handout. At times, you do have to give a handout, but most of the time, it's a hand up. And we just have lost our way, and we've lost it for a very long time. And so my take, I'll sum it up now, is that I don't think it's going to do anything for the election as far as bringing us further together. Unfortunately, I think it's going to take us further apart. That's my summation.
It's just a lot of propaganda is, I think, one of the major reasons for all this hatred, this anger, the frustration among people, instead of fostering love, kindness, and empathy, the qualities that really define who we are. And it's shameful. Like you said, humanity in many ways is losing its soul. And I worry sometimes about the next generation, because they are most likely going to face a very bleak future unless their parents teach them how to break free from this cycle of manipulation and teach people how to critically think for themselves. Because if you look at all of this, it's really like orchestrated by the mainstream news to create this hatred and divisiveness amongst us.
Absolutely. And that's, I couldn't have said it better. And that's where we need to change. And this is why the alt media is so important and so strong, is because people really seek the truth, whether they know it consciously or subconsciously. And the truth will resonate. It may not at the time, because you've been, brainwashed, or the propaganda's gotten to you for so long, or your team, rah, 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 and you're always going to be in your team, right or wrong, it's your team. But eventually, as more and more people wake up, I had a conversation with an in-law that I don't talk to that often, only because my second daughter just got married recently. And he had a conversation, it got political. And I tried to stay neutral, because I am neutral. I don't like either party really at all. I mean, I like the principles. I want our principles to be brought back. But regardless, and I just asked him a few questions, and I wasn't trying to steer him either direction. And it was interesting. By the end of the conversation, he was more what I would call in a neutral position than this side's better than that side kind of an attitude. Because we're all human, we all make mistakes. But if we strive for the same, I'll say the word again, ideals, then we can go somewhere. I want to make another analogy, and this one I think is a good one. I've only used it once or twice in an interview, but imagine for a moment that the reality is, for us here in the States or wherever, you travel by automobile, there's a certain, on most places, there's a certain set of rules that you have to obey, or you're going to get a ticket, or worse, you're going to get in an accident. So there's a speed limit, there's stop at a red, there's slow down at a yellow, there's go on green, there's stop signs, there's all this stuff, how to make a lane change, signal, all these things. Now, just imagine for a moment that one party got to disobey those rules, but the other party had to obey them. What kind of a mess do you think it'd look like on the roadways? It'd be a complete mess, because not everyone's obeying the rules. I never think about, when I'm driving, if the party next to me, ahead of me, behind me is, Democrat or Republican. We all have the same goal, to get to where the heck we're going independently, safely. And that's the kind of attitude we need back. It may be a corny analogy, it may not, but you can imagine. But that, I think, is a good metaphor for what's going on, because you see this in the justice system, you see it, in many aspects of government. And I'm not leaning either way. I'm just telling the truth. Things are really messed up, and they don't have to be, because the same rules ideologies, principles, uh, and risks and rewards apply to everybody. You know, same rules and accountability are supposed to apply to the president of the United States and your local high school, you know, principal or whatever. It does not matter. In this country, citizen is the highest status you can have, and everybody that works in government works for citizens. And that whole principle has been turned upside down, where we are their, let's say, chattel, and we work for them, and they rule us, and they have a different set of rules than we have, and it's just gotten so out of hand, and it's going to be hard to bring it back, and that's why you guys have such a um, tough job ahead. But it's one bite at a time. You know, you can't do it overnight, but one small change at your local whatever can resonate through. You know, the principle of, you know, the butterfly's wings. It sounds corny, but it's true. It's all, we're all interconnected. So that truth, and then that freedom that comes from living the truth, it'll resonate. It'll come back. I don't think it's going to come back by a political change. It could help it come back, but I don't think it's going to be solved by someone outside of ourselves. We owe it to ourselves to be the best we can be, and to teach what we know, and to live within a principled life frame. And that's what really made America great at one time, that we were really pretty much all on the same page. Of course, there's always corruption, there's cheating and all that. I know that. But the whole was basically, the core was so strong that those one-offs really didn't matter too much, because the principles held true for almost everyone.
Right.
First,
Nicely said.
yeah, and excellent analogy. And I just want to interject and say that the corporations and the governments, one of their most used tactics and the strategies they employ is the oldest strategy in the military book, and that's divide and conquer and create a crisis one after the other. Because it's crazy, David, as soon as people start to really catch on to what's taking place, they have to create another crisis to kind of mislead people and distract people. It's one after the other. Because if there's not a crisis or some event or propaganda taking place to shape the way people are thinking and build a narrative, people would ultimately have this realization of, okay, none of this nonsense makes sense. There's something wrong here. But it's one after the other. And dividing and conquering is one of the oldest tactics in the book. And they're doing it pretty successfully, in my opinion. But again, I still have hope for people. People are slowly starting to realize this, but it needs to happen faster, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it will. I think there's a momentum that builds kind of itself. I mean, you know, you can push a ball, you know, on a level surface, and then once it hits like a downward slope, it picks up momentum all on its own. And I think
Right.
that's kind of where we're at. There's more and more people like you, younger and younger. My heart is joyful for the more people I meet, like you, both of you, that, you know, stand up and do it, regardless of consequences. You know, it's not about looking good. It's about being good. It's about being. It's about being true to yourself. And if you're true to yourself, that resonates with everyone around you. You know, we've all been to a party or a dance or whatever where there's one or two people usually that stand out. Sometimes it's in today's world, and it's been across the board because of how they look or they're famous or something. But really, if you're tuned in, it's the way they resonate. They're at a higher frequency. They're at a point where they have something no one else has. And you can do that just by being powerful in an aligned way with what I would call a higher power or source. And that's indisputable. I mean, I'll just make the point further. I've been told, I believe it. I've never been there. I have no idea that I experienced it, didn't. But Mother Teresa was like that. I mean, this woman was like 4 foot something, and not very. She looked like an NFL linebacker, but man, she was so spiritually fit. You could tell when you're just around her. You know, I feel different. Yeah, yeah, you are, because you are now tuned in. Let's say more to what's really important rather than these superficial things. And the pendulum swings both ways. I think with the Instagram phenomena and all these selfies and all the stuff that takes place, I think it could reach a saturation point where you start scrolling so fast it has no meaning, and then you just feel like you're a monkey, you know, with a baseball bat. You're just doing a motion without even thinking about it.
That's
And
the
at
thing.
some
They're
point, it's like, you know
desensitizing
what?
people.
I'm done with this. I don't need Facebook. Or I don't need Instagram. I'm a little off track, but I'm trying to bring us back that sometimes simpler is a lot better.
Yeah, less is more. And this is just really a higher state of consciousness, is what you're referring to. Interestingly, this does tie us then into the economy, because as long as central banks are able to control the money supply, they are able to dictate the terms and the economic conditions to which we are all subject to, which is, I think, one of the most important things. So moving on to the macro global economy, where we stand today, we are experiencing a currency crisis, and the middle class increasingly relies on credit cards now while their incomes continue to drop. So it almost seems like the stage is still being set for the introduction of the central bank digital currency. What are your thoughts on this? Have they changed yet?
No, they haven't. The the money elite, the money powers fully understand what's going on, and it's up to them, in their view, to correct the problem. And that comes straight out of the BIS, and the BIS, the Banks for International Settlements, one the Bankers Bank, wants to pretty much be in charge. And I think there's a very low percentage of countries in the world that are not pursuing a CBDC of some type. So I believe that's their proposal, or their goal at this time, is to eliminate cash, put everybody on a digital currency basis that's centralized, and where they can trace, tax, and control everybody. So I don't see that having been changed yet. But I do think that it's going to be one harder to implement than they think. I can't remember the number. I looked it up on another interview about 6 months ago. I think there's something like 1.4 billion people on the planet that are unbanked. So these would be people that use cash only and don't have a bank account. So it's going to be very difficult to put everybody into the banking system, but that would be their goal. I think if you go back to Modi and what happened in India, I think that was a test case, because so much of that economy was cash only. And then they started to change the amount of rupees you could hold. And remember, they did an exchange or something. I forget the exact details, but they basically made it much harder to start using cash. And I think that was a trial balloon to try to see, in an economy that was very highly cash based, if they could ring it in and how hard it would be. And the discovery was it's not that hard, because everyone, and unfortunately, in a way, has to rely on some type of currency to live, to buy food, to get shelter, to get transportation, communication. So I think there could be something behind it. I don't know. I do think that once they have it implemented, they'll use AI to keep the rules or the structure there, and you won't be able to talk with a bureaucrat or your banker if you mess up. It'll be the algorithm that says, well, you drove too far, your carbon credits are too high, you can't drive to see your grandmother this week. Well, it's her birthday, for crying out loud. Sorry, no exceptions, that kind of thing. May sound corny, but honestly, that's the possibility they have with that type of control. So, we want freedom. We don't want control. We want the exact opposite of what they have. And that's where anywhere you can push back, I think you should. I think you should use cash in whatever jurisdiction you're in as much as possible. I think we should, I'm not against crypto. I think there's some that are more viable than others. And then I think, the hard money, the precious metals, still are accepted almost anywhere in the world, easily recognized and non-denominational. An ounce of gold buys an ounce of gold's worth of goods, no matter if you're in India, Australia, or Canada. It has value, and people recognize that value on a universal basis.
Yeah, and that actually takes us to our next point, which is the banking crisis that's been ongoing for some time now. So, given the vulnerabilities with banks at the moment, especially in the United States, do you think people should really be concerned now still about having money in small banks and large banks, or how do you see that?
Yeah, it was the most, probably one of the most important interviews I did, but also the only one that truly went viral, was one that I did with Daniela Cambone on when she's working with Stansberry Research on bail-ins. And it was the fact that bailouts are outlawed and that the next banking crisis will be bail-ins only. And that means if you have a deposit in the United States of greater than 250,000, that money is subject to be confiscated and you will get shares in the bank. You're an unsecured creditor. Your bank is the business that you're in, even though you didn't recognize that, and that business is failing, but you get equity in that company or that business. And then when that happened in Cyprus and Spain and a few other places, what you got on your shares of the corporation, the bank, you got about 5 to 8 cents on the dollar. So you lost about 95% of what your value was in the bank. I think it's imperative that people understand this. And it goes in cycles. I've had times where I did an interview like this, and then I got a few, phone calls and people that had never been in the metals. I've got $1 million in the bank. It worries me. I've got $3 million in the bank. It worries me. I've owned this business for 20 years. We don't need that much cash for, daily operations. I want to protect it and I don't want to get burned. Who do I buy from and how do I do it? How do I buy gold for the first time? And again, I haven't had one of those kind of calls in some time, but they kind of bunch up depending, I think, on what's going on with people's awareness and what they've seen when these banks started to fail. They did bail them in this last time, even though that was illegal. I mean, technically it was illegal. Don't want to make a big thing out of that. I mean, so many things now in the United States and other places, other countries are not obeying their laws. They're just disregarding them. And that was one that was basically disregarded. And but the problem is you don't know what they're going to do. There's a set of rules that nobody really adheres to anymore, like the traffic lights, analogy I gave a moment ago. You don't know what to happen. If you know that maybe 1/2 of the population doesn't have to obey these rules of driving, and you do, how are you going to protect yourself? Well, maybe it's just to take yourself out of the system. Quit driving, start walking, or start flying. And that is a metaphor for moving some. You still have to have working capital for a family or a business, but you certainly don't have to be vulnerable for more than the exposure that's guaranteed. And even on the guaranteed side, there's been arguments I've read from other, people where the 250 really isn't guaranteed because the FDIC, although they guarantee it, doesn't have nearly enough funds to make everyone whole at that level. It's impossible. They don't have nearly that amount of capital to make good on their promise. So it scares me. And I think nothing would probably upset the general populace more than their money. I mean, let's face it, like it or not, money transcends religion, ethnic origin, sexual orientation, political class, what your job is. All that stuff is transcendent because everybody depends on money to basically eat and live. And because of that transcendence, we're all concerned with it. So if you took that away from the U.S. citizenry or the world, or even just a couple towns. I mean, in the Depression, not every bank failed, but many did. And so people that had a good savings but hadn't, paid off their farm, maybe had enough money in the bank to pay off the farm, but the bank closed its doors. Your money is gone. And now your farm is gone because you can't pay the mortgage, even though you had the ability to do it. Those scenarios actually existed. Not many, but they did. So
Right.
we've given the money powers way too much power, and they're seeking even more. And if we can't see, that's probably the biggest issue of all, at least for me. It's my life. And of course, I'm biased, but I see it because it does transcend everything. I love people. I like to get to know people. I mean, I'm motivated. I still am motivated. And to see these people get screwed and they don't even know why. All they know is that things cost, so much more than they used to, and they're working harder than ever. They even took on a second job and nothing seems to be working out. They don't realize, because there's not enough programs like this, in my opinion, in the mainstream, certainly in the alt media, but not too many people find themselves over here, but they will. Once things start getting harder and harder, people will start seeking answers. So end of speech.
As this is all unfolding in the banking system, they're all systemic. They're connected to each other. Are you familiar with Jim Rickards' ICE 9 scenario, the lockup of the financial system?
Yeah, Jim and I consider him a friend. We don't talk very often, and but we have. at times been on the same platform, in different investment conferences and that kind of thing. And I've had some time with him, not a lot. But
Incredible.
no, he does a very good analogy of the Ice Nine, and he also does a very good analogy about the bricks. But we can come back to that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, what I find interesting is that while that's all going on, the central banks, the financial institutions, and we've spoken about this before, using Ripple, the fintech company Ripple, to construct the payment rails for XRP to bridge and stabilize all the currencies in the world. And it seems that when you look at it, it's pretty straightforward that this fits the ideal candidate to serve as a global reserve currency settlement mechanism, effectively replacing the role of the dollar, but still being able to coexist with it. Do you think that what we've talked about in the past with Ripple and the digital asset XRP, that this is a possible solution to this massive banking crisis that is yet to come?
I do. I mean, I'm, generally speaking, not a big fan of cryptos, as you guys probably know.
Mhm.
But certainly, it's like a weapon. It's not the weapon that does the damage; it's who's holding it and what the purpose is. And so,
Right.
there's certainly some real breakthroughs that can be made with the crypto or the blockchain. And so, we can't look. We have to look at it on an individual case by case basis. It's like race. There are certain traits to races. I mean, I don't mind saying it. I mean, most black guys can certainly outrun or jump me. I'm a white guy. And that's just a fact. It's not prejudice.
Genetics. Yeah.
It's
Right.
not being a bigot. It's just the truth. So it's the same thing in the crypto world. There's some that are just, tag-alongs, cookie cutter, put a name on it and want to get rich quick. And there's others that have a true purpose. I would say XRP definitely does. And I do see it as a neutral. I don't see it as being biased, even though I know the raw shields have, 8% or something at one time. I don't know what the percentage is now. But, there's a little bit of good in the worst of us and a little bit of bad in the best of us. And I'm not trying to make excuses. I'm just a practical guy. Does it fit? Yes. Will it work? Yes. Is it perfect? No. But it certainly can mitigate a lot of problems with the transition. And
Right.
why not use it? It's there, I mean, just because you got a bow and arrow and you're a pretty good archer and you need to feed your family doesn't mean you're going to get that muskrat on the first let go. You might miss.
Yeah. This interesting article on the IMF trust bridges, I don't know if we sent those documents to you, but it talks about how they could use XRP as a stable coin to mitigate a debt crisis.
I'll send it. I'd probably like to write about it in my private work or maybe make do a podcast on it or something. Yeah, I'd love to see that.
I'll send you the documents when we're done here. So, Vendel, what are your thoughts? Did you want to ask something?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, regards to the banking that we were speaking about, the risks. You were saying they wouldn't be able to probably cover. It's not a guarantee that if you had up to $250,000, if the bank went down, you'd get it back. And I was a former banker, so I know this for a fact that it's a guarantee as long as they can afford it. But it's like your insurance company guaranteeing something, but if they're bankrupt, well, that guarantee goes out the window. And the same concept applies in our scenario now. Why? Because the data shows us that the FDIC, Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, has approximately close to $300 billion in reserves to insure U.S. depositors in case a bank goes bust. But here's the problem. The U.S. insures up to $19 trillion in U.S. deposits. So it's not even half that the FDIC would be able to cover if we had more than 2 or 3 banks go bust at the same time. A full-blown banking crisis. And I'm talking about multiple banks. They wouldn't be able to step in and resolve the issue because they can't afford it. So that's where the risk is. And that takes me to my other point is about Jim Rickards and his ICE 9 concept and bail-in. It's really a bail-in what he was talking about, but he used the ICE 9 as an analogy to describe the freeze of the banking system. It's a freeze, but do you think that still has validity? Because I never hear Jim Rickards talk about it anymore, but it has so much weight that still holds today more relevant than before?
I do. Maybe I'm missing something, so I'll throw it out there. And if you see something in my logic that's wrong, then certainly point it out. So let's go back to the 2008 crisis. We were there. We were damn near ICE 9. Because what happened was most of the bad debt was on subprime mortgages, and they are used as assets. And so Bank A didn't trust Bank B because they didn't trust their paper. They did not trust what that bank's balance sheet looked like and how solvent it was. So basically, banks were not moving funds between each other because of the trust issue. Was it across the board? No, but it was systemic. And all banks are interconnected, as you all know, and you've said a couple of times. So what happened was, I will say, luckily, I'm still deciding what the best scenario would have been or could have been. Fed came in and said, this trash paper that you don't accept from Bank A, we're buying it and we're giving you T-bills. Bank B, you don't have liquidity. Give us your dog doo-doo mortgage portfolio and we'll give you treasury bills for it. So they kept the system from doing a freeze in ICE 9 and no transactions moving between the banking system, and got it flowing again because they took the dog dirt off the bank's hands, bought it for usually face value, which it was not even close to that, put it on the Fed's balance sheet, and got the system moving again with the highest rated, most coveted, most trusted, and most quote unquote secure capital available. And that's, of course, US debt. But had that not happened, the system was actually freezing up. You can ask anybody that's really in the know, sort of like going back to it's not about me, but what level you're at. If you get to a New York banker or a Fed banker that was around at that time and got them privately, they'd probably tell you that truth. That's
Yeah. It was about to collapse. They got it right at the bottom, right there. They came in.
Yep. And then Bitcoin came out all of a sudden. What a coincidence, right? I don't believe in coincidences anymore. But something you mentioned, Vindel, about the FDIC, the Federal Reserve was always going to self-destruct, and they knew this. It was engineered to eventually collapse under the weight of its own debt. And this is why I think it's so important to own physical assets like precious metals, which ties me into the next subject. Precious metals, I think we're in the early stages of a commodity super cycle that will probably last over the next few years. What are your thoughts on the precious metals market right now? We know the precious metals markets are rigged, but there is also an upcoming BRICS meeting in October where the Shanghai Gold Exchange has talked about it. They haven't really mentioned it, but they're going to be setting the precious metals prices for themselves. And I think this is going to be the end of market manipulation. What do you think about that? Real price discovery.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think that we are in a position where the idea of the market's being rigged is true. But I also made a statement I've made in a long time that you can manipulate the market in the short term, medium term, but you cannot manipulate the main trend. And the main trend is up. If you go back to 2000, gold was 252 an ounce. Now it's almost 10 times higher. Yes, it's been 25 years, but tenfold in 25 years gives you a CAGR, a compound annual growth rate of almost 9%. So my take is they can only manipulate it so far, so long. And as you pointed out, with what's going on with China, with the Shanghai Gold Exchange, Shanghai Futures Exchange, and they've already pretty much disembarked from the London market and the COMEX, that new days are ahead of us. Plus, the metals have both broken out. I'm certain gold has. Technically, you could argue silver hasn't, but it's gotten very strong. The gold-silver ratio has dropped. It's pretty much confirming gold's move, and we're just getting started. Unfortunately, for those that don't understand the money system, they'll probably come into the party a little bit on the late side. And then, of course, the big pushback will, as we've already discussed quite a bit, and that is that the banks will want to maintain control. But it's interesting that the banks keep buying more and more gold year over year than they have in the past. And that's because they know that their new system may not work as well as they want it to, might be more difficult to implement, and they might have to mitigate that with sound money. And I don't think they'd ever go back to a gold standard, gold coin standard, gold exchange standard. I think they would just say, hey, we've got this much gold. And because of that, we are pledging this much gold to be able to get into the new system, like they purportedly did in the euro long ago. Most people don't even know that fact. But, and they also had to have a certain debt level that they had to achieve, couldn't be too high, or they couldn't participate in the euro when it was found. Coming back to you, I just want to take the power away from them, and that's almost impossible. I mean, it's been very, very rare in monetary history where people actually had the power of money. It's almost always been controlled by a group that felt, I would say, from my studies, superior to the peasantry, and they had the right to mitigate how the economies or the money supply was controlled. And because of that, they controlled nation states. I mean, it's not the top of the pyramid that's the most powerful geopolitical force on the planet. Although the United States has held the military position for a long time, which is waning quite a bit. I mean, it's not even near what most people think it is. But back on point, who's above that? And that's the industrial complex that feeds the military through the banking system. I mean, war, as I've said in the past, all wars are bankers' wars. And if you look at how the system works, it always starts at the top, and the top is the money powers, not the military, not a political ideology. Maybe it's aliens. I'll throw that out there, but no, it's something that controls our daily lives, and most people don't think about it. We're too busy struggling for the almighty dollar to give much thought to how it comes into being, what's its true value, what's the history of money, why do I need more of it? I was making less money 3 years ago, but I seemed I was better off than I am now, but my paycheck's bigger. All those kind of questions that face the populace worldwide.
Yeah. And I think this is naturally where we're going to see the gradual erosion of individual freedoms. At this point, it's obviously been a very calculated effort because, again, I said this in the beginning, if you can control the money supply and influence the economic conditions, and that's really what's been going on, those in power have been able to dictate the terms of financial transactions, meaning they can dictate the terms of personal liberty. So at this point, I don't think it's about money. It's really just about control. And I think the less people understand about history, economics, and even politics, the easier it becomes for them to manipulate us. Unfortunately, also educational standards are in decline. And that means if you're less informed, the control mechanism becomes more effective.
Agreed.
Well said. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, David, do you think there could be a gold revaluation or a gold confiscation, kind of like in 1933, where Roosevelt issued the executive order to confiscate gold for a few different reasons? Do you think that could ever happen again in the future?
Yeah, I couldn't rule it out. I'm too good a thinker, or think I am, to rule it out entirely, but I really doubt it. I mean, there's so much distrust of the government at this point in time, and most people um, would do what they did in the 30s. I mean, not all that gold was turned in. A lot of people just kept their mouth shut, threw it in a coffee can, buried it outside the kitchen window, and just kept their mouth shut.
Yeah.
So I think you'd see the same thing. I mean, where you would see, if there were a confiscation, it would be the big places that you could see, like the ETF. So you'd see a gold ETF where they could go get that. But as far as going door to door, house to house, they would just edict, that you were caught, trading in gold, then you're going to have this penalty. And by that, enough people would be in fear to not do it. But there would be enough people too that would just transact some gold on the quiet, on the QT, that they would take that risk. And that would be mitigated by, personal associations in most cases, like, the drug world. I mean, there's people that do drugs. I mean, let's be honest. And how do they do it? Well, they do it how they do it. But the point is that they have a network of trust that they know that they're pretty much protected from doing something illicit. that they can do with a reasonable degree of certainty that they're not going to be, ratted out on or turned over to the cops or whatever. I'm not trying
Right.
to associate one with the other as being illegal, but if they make it illegal, the point is that people do what's most beneficial to their own well-being, regardless of what the laws say. And
Right.
now with the absolute in your face that the laws don't seem to apply equally across the board. Same rules, laws, and accountability for everybody is null and void. Depends what political class you're in, or what ethnic group, or where you come from, or all these other mitigating factors that aren't supposed to apply at all. So what you see is a decline in the social fabric of society, which we're witnessing day after day, accelerating. And it's like, oh, who gives a hoot? All the bad guys, the big corp guys, they're all cheating and lying and, taking what they can. Why not me? What penalty do I have? And so, unfortunately, this is the breakdown of society. It's a change in the cultural norms, and it accelerates. And we're going to unfortunately have to hit a bottom before we could come back. That doesn't mean that you and your brother and me and others don't have to live by a higher standard, because it's only by living by a higher standard and living really in that high frequency, which is the best way to live. I mean, to live on what I call a natural high, where you're actually contributing and doing the right thing. It is a reward in and of itself, believe it or not. I think you two both understand that and feel it to your being. A lot of people don't, because they're so bogged down. They don't even know which way's up. They get so much propaganda and they believe it that until they come to the surface and get some fresh air for the first time, they can't really realize, oh my God, I've been living my whole life. I've been under this blanket of deception that's deliberate to keep me down. I want to be all I can be. Let me breathe some fresh air and get on with it. So we're getting to that point. It'll be your generation that will bring it about. The old codgers like me can help guide you, because I was probably born in the wrong generation. But I don't know. I mean, I'm in the right place, really. You know
Yeah.
what I'm saying? My thinking is similar to your thinking. And this is where the truth is all powerful. And we can live that truth and march on, regardless of how popular we are or how many photos we get or where we get to speak or whatever, because it's such a powerful way to live, that you have that joy that most people don't get anymore. They're so beat down by chasing that dollar to pay the bill and get behind. And the story, I keep saying it, but it's sad, because we have such potential and we have such a huge potential for the future, with all the technology that can be used for both good and bad, and used for good, where we can relieve ourselves of this burden that we have of having to work for the man, or work for the corporation, or work for the government, or work for somebody else, when we really could have the joy of being our true selves and mitigating these irrational rules that are put upon us over and over for someone else's benefit, not the mutual benefit of all humanity.
Nicely said. And well, two things I wanted to touch on. Vindel, you mentioned something about the gold confiscation. I know a lot of people in the XRP community have been afraid that, for instance, if the IMF was to use the XRP as an ESDR, that they would be able to confiscate that. That's something that people are actually more concerned of than getting their gold confiscated in this space. It's very strange, and it's a possibility, but we'll see how that plays out. Another thing also is the prosperity and the privilege that has been afforded by the dollar. You said chasing the dollar. I think it has turned many Americans into compulsive consumers, really. And that's obviously influenced by major conglomerates like Amazon. The consumer behavior contributes also to the broader societal issues that do need addressing.
I think you're spot on. I'm going to go a bit deeper, and I think Amazon, everything you said, I agree. But I'll look at it slightly deeper. I think that the idea is pervasive from let's say, the think tanks. I mean, I don't know who to blame it on. I don't want to blame it anywhere that doesn't deserve it. But it's the whole idea that you're not enough. So it comes to the idea that if you're not enough, then you got to get something outside of yourself to be enough. So if you get the right food, the right girlfriend, the right car, the right bank account, the right job, you write the right book, you do the right podcast, all these things that are external to our true selves are something we're striving for. And you, as I said in the movie, The Four Horsemen, you can never get enough of what you don't need. What we need is we need to be taught, regardless of our religious faith. I'm a much more of a spiritual guy, God of your own conception, that you realize that you're enough. Then if you start with you're enough, yeah, you have needs, but needs are different than wants. So if you can get to that beginning that you're enough, you're taught from the time you get into school or by your parents. Many parents do this, many don't, that you in and of yourself are such a fantastic miracle that you don't need anything external. Yeah, you need things external, but in other words, you can't look for something outside of yourself to make you better. It really is an inside job. It's the Maslow's theory, the hierarchy of needs. You have the need to eat, you have the need shelter, you have the need for companionship, you have all these needs. And as you go up the pyramid, the top need is self-actualization. And I want to turn that pyramid upside down. So you start at the bottom, you have self-actualization. You are enough. And I'll just give you a quick example. Jack Canfield said it in probably his first book years and years and years ago, but I've always been kind of a self-improvement guy. And then he said, you are such a miracle because you won the greatest race of all time. And I don't remember the numbers, but out of the millions of sperm that come to fertilize the egg, you won. You're the one that hit the egg to become you. So think about that. You had a 1 in a million or 1 in a billion or 1 in 10 million. I don't know how many sperm there are in conception, but you're it. And that's something to contemplate. So you are enough. And you are here for a reason. And you do have a purpose. We're not taught any of this stuff, but we're taught the opposite. You need to buy this car to feel good. I've done it. I mean, I remember when I got my new truck, man, I felt fancy schmancy for about a week and a half, but then it wore off, because it's an inside job. It's not because I drive this truck, I'm a better person. I might feel a little juiced up for a while, but this is what's missing in my view. So it goes to me beyond the Amazon. I think the Amazon's a super accurate analogy of what's going on. But, my point is it's everybody, not just Amazon. It's sort of a psychology that's put across the populace in most cultures, not in all cultures, but in the West, more in the West than anywhere else, that it's what you have, not who you are. That's wrong. It's who you are, not what you have.
To go even deeper into what you just mentioned there, I think the issues that we talked about, the societal issues, are being exploited to fit the new agendas, like the climate change agenda. Because if they can have the narrative to shift promoting minimalism and reducing consumption because it's environmentally beneficial, then they could use that as a means to control more of our freedoms, our personal freedoms.
Absolute perfect insight. I'm glad you brought it up because it's probably the most important part of this part of our conversation, because if you can shift, as you said, to a minimalist and have that guilt, oh, you've had too much for so long, or you guys had all these toys and look at how many you now use and how many you just gave away or broke or you don't use anymore. Now you've got to bear down. You only get to eat this many calories every day, but it's the right thing to do because we told you so. And this is really, really still, this is the control mechanism just coming from the other side. Consume, consume, consume. You're not enough, get more. Can never be satisfied. Again, you can't get enough of what you don't need. But then on the other hand, you've taken too much. Now we've got to cut you back and you've got to, basically starve you to make it right again because you were a naughty boy and girl and you didn't do what we told you before. Both are wrong, as you well know. And yet we strive for what nature teaches, and that's balance. I mean, when are you the happiest? When you're your perfect weight. You haven't eaten too much or eaten too little. You're just right. And when you feel best physically, when you exercise the right amount. If you overdo it, you're too tired, you haven't recovered. If you do too little, you're not going to be as agile. You're not going to be as awake. You're not going to be as fit. So this is what nature preaches, to be in that neutral centered point where we're grounded and we can take things in, but there's no pause anymore. It's I've got to this or I've got to be here. We're never living where we can only really live, and that's in the now. We're living in the past or living in the future, and the past is, whatever it is for any individual, but the future is painted pretty bleak with the propaganda, when the reality is we have a high, probably the highest potential ever, if we're able to unveil some of these new energy systems, a new banking system,
Yeah.
and we're able to serve each other rather than chisel off of each other. But that takes a huge shift in consciousness, and it's consciousness is the ultimate in my view. So that doesn't change. It's our ability to align with it that needs to change. In other words, again, I use the word too much maybe, but the vibration. If your brain and your head and your heart are aligned and you're vibrating in tune with the reality rather than the propaganda, now you can really fight them. But
Yep.
how do you teach that? I'm not sure. But
It's called heart consciousness. That's something that hasn't been talked about, and that's something people are going to start to find out about. Working the mind, body, and Holy Spirit, if you will, together, and that's how you shift your consciousness, elevate it. Vindel, would you like to say anything?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask you one last thing, David, before we wrap it up and you tell us about the documentary you're working on. My question is, so the Treasury U.S. Secretary Janet Yellen has been recently warning about countries leaving the dollar. Do you think she's signaling or indirectly indicating a crisis is coming?
I do. Yeah. I mean, I'm not a big fan of her. I really don't want to judge her, but the elite have a way of kind of communicating with themselves with symbols and rhetoric. And when she said that, that was a big hint to the banking elite, the money masters, that yeah, we know the dollar's days are numbered, but don't pull out too soon, or you might get something unexpected.
Mm.
And of course, that's the whole thing about the tail end of the curve, is that you might do something that's normal on any given day in the bond market, as an example, and that normal is abnormal to the system. I mean, for example, you go to a bank; it's supposed to have so much reserves. Of course, none of them have cash reserves like they probably should. And the guy, your neighbor, just took out $5,000, and there's you go in and you want $20, and they don't have it. I mean, once you get to that tail end, anything can happen. It's very vulnerable, and I think she's signaling that we're at near that point where we don't know what will happen, and be careful. So, as going back to the Ice Nine, I mean, you could have a situation. And the last thing I want to say about this, I thought about it a couple of times and didn't voice it, and that is the vulnerability of a cyber attack. I mean, these physical wars are horrible. As I said, all wars are bankers' wars. But when you got to a cyber attack coming from wherever that shuts down a major brokerage house or a money center bank or a foreign exchange market or some settlement procedure in the overnight repo market or any of those things, they're systemic, as you keep telling us, and you're exactly right. They're all interconnected. So there is much more vulnerability to, I think, a crisis in the banking sector that would be due to a computer glitch, failure, attack than anywhere else, and that's a big problem.
Yeah,
They could easily blame it on someone too.
That's right.
of
They can
course.
put the blame anywhere they want.
I spoke with Martin Armstrong the other day, and he had some very interesting insight. He said that they were looking for an excuse to go to war so they can default on the debt. And then I tried to explain to him about how the central banks are not necessarily going to disappear. I said that their role is going to evolve, because I mentioned the XRP. I keep going back to it because I really believe it's going to be like the weapon or the secret solution to all these problems in the banking system. I just think that they have a problem reaction solution here set in stage already. And the what you see happening with BlackRock and Ice Nine, the declining of the purchasing power of the dollar, that's all an attempt to consolidate before introducing that system and create that dependency.
Well, I think you're right. I'm not a big crypto guy, as I keep saying, but the truth is, when I saw Wall Street get involved the first time, I put it on my spec list. I put in XRP, I put in Ethereum, and I put in HUD 8. Took HUD 8 off the list, but I've kept the other two. Ethereum outperformed Bitcoin by a wide margin. I'm not a Bitcoin guy, but I just like to come back to kind of the last thing, if we might, and that's my documentary. 'Cause
Yes.
it's kind of a good
Please.
place to sum up. But it's the URL for it, silversunrise.tv, and that's a working title. I may change it. As we all know, I'm associated with silver, but the subtitle is the important part. It's breaking free from the stress, fear, and control of money. And that's basically, a sentence to summarize my life's work. I mean, if you want to say give us one word of what you want to your life to reflect, it'd be freedom. It wouldn't be honest money. It wouldn't be silver. It'd be freedom. But they go hand in hand. Free money, uh, it can protect freedom. So it delves into the stress, fear, and control of money that exerts over our lives that we've talked about the whole time. Appreciate you guys, what you're doing and your thoughtfulness and your great questions, because they're just very pertinent to today's world. Just read a little bit more here. Despite its essential role in society, many feel enslaved by money. Silver Sunrise explores this emotional and mental toll, questioning why money drives everything from love affairs and conflicts to the rise and fall of empire. So it's a big task. We're about halfway through. I've funded a lot of it. I guess I could afford to fund it all, but I am looking for donations. If you donate, you will be recognized in the credits in the film. We've got a lot of interesting people. And I would say more than any other thing, that I've watched a lot of my documentaries and docudramas and movies about the money and the money system and Wall Street and all this stuff, but not many, in my view, have talked about the spiritual side of money. And that's what I'm aiming to do here more than anything else. Because as we talked about earlier, if you are spiritually fit, if you are enough, or you could get enough, that you don't need all this stuff, what your needs aren't really that hard. And I'm not saying that the powers that be should put us all on a minimalist standard. I mean, to thine own self be true. You know what you need. But that to have that freedom and to have that freedom restored. And the only way to do it, as you said, the head, heart, and hands consciousness that we need. So I'm striving to get that idea through this movie by doing different interviews with different people that have stressed, let's say, more of the spiritual side of money than maybe others have. And the narration is pretty much standard to what we talked about today throughout. So that line of reasoning goes throughout the whole movie, but the subsets, what's on top of it, and it's these ideas that we have that can progress humanity to the next level, where there's a lot more positivity, freedom, and ability to have the time to become your highest self and not be burdened with being so tired just by having to work two jobs to be able to exist. I mean, our lives should be so much more powerful than they are. And
Yeah.
when you get a discrepancy where 1% of the population owns whatever it is, 90% of the supposed resources on the planet, something is definitely wrong.
Yeah.
And my heart goes out to all these people everywhere, regardless of jurisdiction, on just being good people and not buying into this garbage propaganda that's so pervasive everywhere, but more so, I think, in the West than it would be in some of the Eastern countries. It still exists everywhere. But be able to critically think for yourself and move out of this, make the shift. It's possible to do it. Anyone can do it. And I want to give some thrust in that direction with this document.
I love
I'm
it.
looking forward to it. I really want to see this, and I will certainly put the links in the description below where people can donate.
Thank you so much, David, for coming on. It's always, it's always everything we wanted and more than we hoped for every time you come on. So great discussion, great insight. Thank you.
Well, truly my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Always. Hopefully we could do this again in the future. We'd love to have you back on.
Okay.
We'll make it happen. Don't worry. All right, guys. Everyone take care, and we'll catch up later.